Princess Zarathix had never been so humiliated in her 300 years of existence. The crystalline corridors of the diplomatic vessel, Starweaver's Promise, seemed to mock her with their perfect, sterile beauty as she stormed through them, her four arms gesticulating wildly in frustration. Her translucent blue skin flickered with embarrassment patterns that any member of her species would recognize as deep shame. The Council of Elders had just finished their monthly evaluation of her diplomatic progress, and the results were devastating. "Lacks understanding of alien psychology," Elder Morthak had declared with his usual cold precision. "Shows no improvement in cross-species empathy. Perhaps the princess should consider a different career path." Those words stung worse than a plasma burn. Zarathix came from the most prestigious bloodline in the Velthari Empire, a family that had produced legendary diplomats for over 2 millennia. Her great-grandmother had negotiated the Treaty of Seven Suns. Her mother had prevented 3 galactic wars through sheer diplomatic brilliance, and here she was, failing at the most basic requirement of her birthright. The worst part was that the elders were right. Despite years of study, despite memorizing the cultural databases of over 400 species, she couldn't seem to connect with aliens on any meaningful level. Every diplomatic simulation ended in disaster. Every cultural exchange left her more confused than before. She was supposed to be preparing for her first real diplomatic mission, but at this rate, she'd never leave the training vessel. Lost in her brooding, Zarathix took a wrong turn near the guest quarters. The Starweaver's Promise was massive, designed to accommodate hundreds of different species for diplomatic training exercises. She rarely ventured into this section, as it was currently housing various alien ambassadors who were helping with the training programs. She was about to turn back when she heard something that stopped her cold. Music. Not the harmonious crystal chimes of her people, or the mathematical precision of Andromedan compositions, or even the chaotic noise that the Zephyrians called music. This was something entirely different. It had rhythm and emotion, and something else she couldn't identify, something that made her chest feel strange. Without thinking, she followed the sound. It was coming from behind a door marked with symbols she recognized as belonging to the human delegation. Humans were relatively new to galactic politics, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 50 years ago. Most species considered them primitive and unrefined, barely worth diplomatic attention. The music grew louder as she approached the door, and she realized it was slightly ajar. She knew she shouldn't intrude, but curiosity overwhelmed her better judgment. She peered through the gap. The room was unlike anything she'd ever seen. Where Velthari living spaces were pristine and orderly, this place was chaos. Books were scattered everywhere, their physical pages yellowed and worn. Strange objects covered every surface. A wooden carving of some animal, glowing rectangles showing moving pictures, containers holding what appeared to be dried plant matter, and dozens of other incomprehensible items. But what truly shocked her was the human. Ambassador Marcus Chen was dancing. Not the formal ritualistic movements that passed for dance among most species, but something wild and free and utterly unself-conscious. His eyes were closed, his face showed pure joy, and his body moved to the music as if it were the most natural thing in the universe. He spun and jumped and threw his arms wide, occasionally singing along in a voice that was rough but filled with passion. Zarathix had studied human physiology, of course. She knew they were bipedal mammals with internal skeletons and primitive sensory organs. What she hadn't expected was how alive this one seemed. Every movement expressed something, communicated something, even though he thought he was alone. The song changed, becoming slower and more melancholy, and the human's movements changed with it. Now he swayed gently, his expression becoming wistful. He picked up a small framed image and held it close, and Zarathix saw his eyes glisten with moisture. She knew enough about humans to recognize tears, but she'd never seen the context before. In her culture, emotional displays were carefully controlled and ritualized. But this human was experiencing his emotions directly, without filters or ceremony. It was raw and honest, and somehow beautiful. The princess found herself leaning closer to get a better view, forgetting entirely about diplomatic protocols or invasion of privacy. She wanted to understand what she was seeing. How could such a primitive species express such complex emotions? How could movement and sound create something that made her feel things she had no words for? Unfortunately, her fascination proved to be her downfall. In her eagerness to see better, she pressed too hard against the door. The automated system registered her presence and opened fully with a soft chime. Ambassador Chen spun around, and for a moment they stared at each other in mutual shock. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 30 standard years, with dark hair and intelligent brown eyes that were currently wide with surprise. She could see him taking in her appearance. Her tall, willowy frame, her 4 arms, her blue-tinged skin, and the elaborate ceremonial robes that marked her royal status. "Oh," he said, which was apparently a human expression of surprise. "Your Highness." "I didn't realize anyone was there." Zarathix felt her skin flush with deep purple embarrassment patterns. "Ambassador Chen, I apologize. I was passing by and heard the music. I should not have intruded." She expected him to be angry or offended. Any other species would have demanded formal apologies and possibly filed diplomatic complaints. Instead, Marcus smiled, and that simple expression transformed his entire face. "The music drew you in, huh?" He gestured to the small device that was still playing. "I can understand that. Music has a way of crossing barriers." "I have never heard anything like it," she admitted, then immediately regretted the confession. It revealed ignorance, weakness. But Marcus's smile widened. "Really? That's amazing. Here, let me start over." He touched the device, and the music began again from the beginning. This is called Beyond the Sea by Bobby Darin. It's old by human standards, but it's one of my favorites. The melody filled the room again, and Zarathix found herself swaying slightly despite her best efforts to remain dignified. Marcus noticed and chuckled. "It gets to you, doesn't it? That's the power of music. It doesn't matter what species you are or where you come from. If it speaks to you, it speaks to you." He began to move again, but this time his movements were smaller, more contained. He was still dancing, but he was also watching her, gauging her reaction. "In human culture," he explained as he moved, "music and dance are forms of expression. They help us communicate emotions that words can't capture. They help us connect with each other and with something larger than ourselves." Zarathix watched, fascinated. In her diplomatic training, she had learned that humans were considered emotionally unstable, that their feelings made them unpredictable and dangerous in negotiations. But watching Marcus move to the music, she saw something different. His emotions weren't chaotic or destructive. They were integrated into his being, giving depth and richness to everything he did. "Would you like to try?" Marcus asked suddenly. The question was so unexpected that Zarathix took a step back. "I do not understand." "Dancing, moving to the music. It's not about being good at it or following rules. It's about feeling the rhythm and letting your body respond." "That would be highly inappropriate," she said automatically. "I am a princess of the Velthari Empire. I do not participate in primitive rituals." The words came out harsher than she intended, and she saw Marcus's expression shift slightly. Not angry, but disappointed. And somehow that disappointment hurt more than anger would have. "Of course," he said quietly. "I understand. Cultural differences." He moved to turn off the music, but something in Zarathix rebelled against the idea of returning to silence. "Wait," she said. "Perhaps you could explain more about this form of expression." For diplomatic purposes, of course. Marcus's face lit up again. Absolutely. Understanding human culture is important for diplomatic relations. He restarted the music and began to move again, but this time he narrated his movements. This song tells a story about longing, about being separated from someone you love. The melody rises and falls like waves, like the sea the singer is thinking about crossing. As he spoke, Zarathix began to hear the patterns he described. The music wasn't random noise, it was structured communication, as complex as any language, and his movements weren't wild abandon. They were translation, converting sound into physical expression. Now the tempo changes, Marcus continued as the rhythm shifted. It becomes more hopeful, more determined. The singer is deciding to make the journey despite the risks. Zarathix found herself nodding along, beginning to understand. It is like a ritual storytelling, but with the entire body participating. Exactly! Marcus's enthusiasm was infectious. You're getting it. Music and dance are just different languages for communication. They spent the next hour exploring different types of human music. Marcus played everything from classical symphonies to tribal drumming to something called jazz that seemed to break all the rules Zarathix thought she was learning. Each style told different stories, expressed different emotions, came from different human cultures and time periods. What amazed her most was how Marcus seemed to understand all of it intuitively. He didn't need to analyze or categorize or memorize cultural protocols. He simply felt the music and responded to it. When he played a sad song, his whole demeanor changed to match the emotion. When he played something energetic, his movements became more dynamic. "How do you know what response is appropriate?" she asked finally. "How do you know which emotions to express?" Marcus paused, considering the question seriously. "I don't think about it consciously. I just listen to what the music is saying and let it move through me. It's not about appropriate or inappropriate. It's about being honest." The word honest hung in the air between them. In Velthari culture, honesty was a complex concept, involving layers of meaning and careful consideration of status and propriety. But Marcus seemed to mean something simpler and more direct. "What if your response is wrong?" she pressed. "What if others judge you for it?" "Then they do," Marcus shrugged. "But if I'm not being true to what I feel, then what's the point? Music is about connection, about sharing something real. If I'm fake, then the whole experience becomes meaningless." This philosophy was so alien to everything Zarathix had been taught that she felt dizzy. Her entire life had been about controlling responses, about calculating the proper diplomatic reaction to every situation. The idea of simply being honest about what she felt was terrifying and thrilling at the same time. As if sensing her internal struggle, Marcus smiled gently. "It's scary at first, I know. Vulnerability usually is. But it's also liberating. Want to try something simple?" Before she could object, he selected a new song. This one was slower, with a gentle, swaying rhythm that seemed to move like breathing. "Just close your eyes and listen," he said softly. "Don't think about what you should do. Just feel what the music wants you to do." Zarathix hesitated for a long moment, then slowly closed her eyes. The music washed over her, and for the first time in her life, she tried to simply experience it without analyzing it. The melody was warm and welcoming, like sunlight on her homeworld. The rhythm was steady and reassuring like a heartbeat. Without conscious thought, she began to sway. Just slightly at first, then more noticeably. Her four arms moved in gentle patterns, responding to different layers in the music. She felt foolish and exposed, but she also felt something else. Free. When the song ended and she opened her eyes, Marcus was watching her with an expression of wonder. "That was beautiful," he said quietly. You have a natural sense of rhythm. Zarathix felt her skin flush with pleasure patterns she rarely displayed. It was strange. I felt as though the music was moving through me rather than around me. That's exactly right. That's what makes it special. Marcus looked at the chronometer on his wall and sighed. I hate to cut this short, but I have a meeting with the trade committee in 10 minutes. Reality crashed back around Zarathix like cold water. She was a princess of the Velthari Empire, standing in an alien's quarters, having just participated in primitive physical expression. If anyone had seen her, the scandal would be enormous. Yes, of course, she said, her formal diplomatic mask sliding back into place. Thank you for the cultural education, Ambassador. It was most informative. But as she moved toward the door, Marcus called after her. Your Highness? If you'd ever like to learn more about human music, you're welcome to visit any time. I have thousands of songs from hundreds of different human cultures. Each one tells a different story. Zarathix paused at the threshold, looking back at him. His offer was sincere, without any hint of political motive or diplomatic calculation. He was simply sharing something he loved with someone who had shown interest. Perhaps I will, she said softly, and realized she meant it. As she made her way back through the crystalline corridors toward her own quarters, Zarathix felt different somehow. The sterile perfection that had always comforted her now seemed cold and lifeless. She found herself humming the melody from that first song, the one Marcus had called Beyond the Sea, and with each note she felt something stirring inside her that she couldn't quite name. For the first time in her life, she had experienced honest emotional expression, and it had changed something fundamental in how she saw the universe around her. 3 days passed before Zarathix found an excuse to return to the guest quarters. She told herself it was purely for diplomatic research, that understanding human culture was essential for her training. But she couldn't stop thinking about the music, about the way Marcus had moved with such freedom, about how alive he had seemed. When she approached his door, she could hear voices inside. Multiple humans were talking and laughing, their voices mixing together in a chaotic but somehow pleasant cacophony. She almost turned away, but then the door opened and Marcus appeared in the doorway. Your Highness! His face brightened with genuine pleasure. Perfect timing. We're having what humans call a jam session. Would you like to join us? Before she could protest that it would be inappropriate, he was gently guiding her into the room. Inside, she found 3 other humans, each holding strange objects that she gradually realized were instruments. One had a wooden box with strings, another held a small rectangular device with black and white keys, and the third sat behind a collection of circular objects and metal cylinders. Everyone, this is Princess Zarathix of the Velthari Empire, Marcus announced. She's interested in learning about human music. The humans looked up at her with curiosity, but no fear or excessive deference. She was accustomed to other species, either cowering before her royal status or challenging it aggressively. This casual acceptance was unsettling but oddly refreshing. Zara, meet Sarah Chen, Marcus's sister. He indicated the woman with the stringed instrument. She's our ship's xenobiologist, but she's also an incredible guitarist. That's Dr. James Wright on keyboard. He's with the Cultural Exchange Program. And behind the drums is Lieutenant Maria Santos from Ship Security. Each human nodded or waved in greeting, their manner friendly but respectful. Sarah strummed her guitar, producing a pleasant chord. Marcus mentioned you have a natural sense of rhythm. Want to hear what we've been working on? Zarathix found herself nodding, settling into a chair that Marcus had quickly adjusted for her different physiology. The humans began to play, and immediately she understood why Marcus had called it a jam session. They weren't following a predetermined pattern like classical Velthari music. Instead, they were creating something spontaneous, building on each other's contributions in real time. Sarah started with a simple melody on her guitar, something gentle and contemplative. James added harmonies on his keyboard, notes that supported and enhanced the guitar without overwhelming it. Maria's drums came in last, not with the aggressive pounding Zara Thix expected, but with subtle rhythms that gave the music structure and drive. But what fascinated her most was how they communicated without words. A nod from Sarah signaled a key change. A glance from James indicated a tempo shift. Maria's smile told them she was about to add a more complex rhythm. They were having a conversation through music, sharing ideas and emotions in real time. "How do you coordinate without discussing the structure beforehand?" Zara Thix asked when they paused between songs. "We listen," Sarah explained simply. "Each of us brings something to the music, but we're also constantly responding to what the others are doing. It's like a conversation where everyone talks at the same time, but somehow it makes sense." "It requires trust," Dr. Wright added. "We have to trust that the others will support what we're doing, even when we take risks or try something new." This concept of musical trust was revolutionary to Zara Thix. In her culture, artistic expression was carefully planned and executed according to ancient traditions. The idea of creating something beautiful through spontaneous cooperation seemed impossible, yet she had just witnessed it happening. "Would you like to try participating?" Maria asked, gesturing to a collection of small percussion instruments on a nearby table. "These are simple rhythm instruments. No right or wrong way to use them." Zara Thix's first impulse was to decline, but something about the human's patient, encouraging expressions made her reconsider. She selected what Marcus identified as a shaker, a small gourd filled with seeds that made soft, rattling sounds when moved. "Just listen to the music and add whatever feels right," Sarah encouraged. "There's no pressure to be perfect." They began playing again, and Zara Thix listened carefully to the rhythm section, trying to understand the patterns. Maria's drumming was more complex than she'd initially realized, with subtle variations and accents that gave the music personality. Gradually, tentatively, Zara Thix began to shake her instrument in time with the basic beat. At first she was rigid and self-conscious, but as the music continued, she found herself relaxing. The shaker's sound added a new texture to the music, something that complemented the other instruments without competing with them. When she varied the rhythm slightly, adding little flourishes during musical pauses, the other humans smiled and nodded encouragingly. By the third song, she was using all four of her arms to play multiple percussion instruments simultaneously. Her natural Velthari coordination, developed for complex diplomatic ceremonies, translated surprisingly well to music. She could maintain steady rhythms with two arms while adding accents and variations with the other two. "That's incredible," Dr. Wright said during a break. "Your four-armed coordination is giving the music such rich, polyrhythmic texture. It's like having two percussionists in perfect sync." Zara Thix felt her skin flush with pleased patterns. "In my culture, we use similar coordination for ceremonial movements, but they are always predetermined and symbolic. This improvisation is completely new to me. Music is one of the few universal languages we've found," Marcus said thoughtfully. "Almost every species we've encountered has some form of music, but the amazing thing is how different approaches can work together. Your Velthari sense of precision is adding something we couldn't achieve on our own." The session continued for another hour, with Zara Thix gradually becoming more confident and experimental. She discovered that she could create complex rhythmic conversations with Maria, their instruments playing off each other in intricate patterns. When Sarah played a melody that reminded her of the wind patterns on her homeworld, she found herself adding percussion that echoed those natural rhythms. But the real revelation came when Dr. Wright began playing something he called blues. The music was built around emotional expression rather than technical perfection, with bent notes and deliberate imperfections that somehow made it more powerful. When he explained that blues music came from human experiences of suffering and overcoming adversity, Zarathix felt something click into place. "Your species creates beauty from pain?" she asked. "Not just beauty," Sarah replied. "Understanding, connection. When someone plays the blues, they're sharing their pain with others who have felt similar things. It transforms suffering into something that can be shared and understood." This concept was so profound that Zarathix had to stop playing to process it. In Velthari culture, emotional pain was considered a private matter, something to be endured alone with dignity. The idea of transforming it into art that could connect people across different experiences was revolutionary. "Could you teach me to play something like this?" she asked hesitantly. The humans exchanged glances, and she saw something pass between them that she was beginning to recognize as the kind of wordless communication she'd witnessed in their music. "Of course," Marcus said gently. "But blues isn't just about technique. It comes from understanding struggle and loss. Do your people experience those things?" Zarathix considered the question seriously. "We experience disappointment when we fail to meet expectations. We feel isolation when we cannot connect with others despite our best efforts. We know the frustration of being judged inadequate despite our sincere attempts to improve." As she spoke, she realized she was describing her own experiences as much as her species' general emotional range. The humans seemed to understand this, their expressions becoming more compassionate. "Those feelings can definitely be expressed through blues music," Dr. Wright said softly. "Here, let me show you something simple." He played a basic blues progression on his keyboard, explaining how the structure allowed for emotional expression within a framework of rules. The beauty of blues is that it's simple enough for anyone to learn, but deep enough to spend a lifetime exploring. Zarathix picked up a simple melodic percussion instrument, something Marcus called a kalimba, and began experimenting with the patterns Dr. Wright was showing her. The thumb piano's gentle, resonant tones seemed perfect for expressing the subtle melancholy she sometimes felt when diplomatic protocols prevented her from making real connections with other beings. As she played, she found herself thinking about all the times she had failed to understand alien psychology, all the diplomatic simulations that had ended in confusion and embarrassment. But instead of dwelling on the shame of those failures, she began to transform those feelings into music. The simple, repetitive patterns of the blues somehow made space for all her frustration and disappointment, while also offering a framework for moving beyond them. "That's it," Maria said softly. "You're not just playing the music now. You're speaking through it." The session gradually wound down as the ship's evening cycle began, but Zarathix found herself reluctant to leave. The experience of creating music with others had given her something she hadn't even known she was missing: genuine connection across species lines. "Thank you for including me," she said formally as she prepared to go. "This has been most educational." But Sarah shook her head. "This wasn't education, Your Highness. This was friendship. You're welcome to join us anytime you want to make music together." The word friendship hit Zarathix like a revelation. In her diplomatic training, she had learned about alliances, treaties, trade agreements, and mutual benefit arrangements, but she had never been taught about the simple concept of enjoying someone's company without ulterior motives. As she walked back to her quarters, Zarathix carried her kalimba with her, occasionally playing soft melodies that seemed to express things she had never been able to say with words. The crystalline corridors of the Star Weaver's promise no longer felt sterile and perfect. Now they felt empty, lacking the warmth and spontaneity she had experienced in the human's makeshift music room. That night, instead of reviewing diplomatic protocols or studying alien psychology databases, she sat in her quarters playing soft blues melodies and thinking about trust. The humans had trusted her enough to include her in their creative process, even though she was a complete beginner. They had trusted her to add something valuable to their music, even though she came from a completely different species with different cultural values. More importantly, she had trusted them enough to be vulnerable, to try something new, to risk looking foolish in front of beings she barely knew. And that trust had been rewarded with acceptance and encouragement rather than judgment. For the first time since beginning her diplomatic training, Zarathix began to understand what cross-species empathy might actually mean. It wasn't about memorizing cultural protocols or calculating appropriate responses. It was about being willing to share something real with another being, even if that something was imperfect or uncertain. The next morning brought another evaluation session with the Council of Elders, but for once, Zarathix wasn't dreading it. As she made her way to the council chambers, she hummed a soft melody she had improvised the night before, and found that the music gave her a confidence she had never felt before. Whatever happened in the evaluation, she knew something fundamental had changed in how she understood herself and her relationship to other beings. The humans had given her a gift more valuable than any diplomatic protocol. They had shown her that real connection was possible, even across the vast differences between species. And if it was possible with humans, perhaps it was possible with anyone willing to share something honest and real, whether that something was music, emotion, or simply the willingness to trust. The Council of Elders evaluation chamber fell silent as Princess Zarathix finished her presentation. For the past hour, she had demonstrated a revolutionary approach to diplomatic interaction that none of them had seen before. Instead of following traditional protocols, she had shown how emotional authenticity and genuine curiosity could create bridges between even the most disparate species. Elder Morthak, who had been her harshest critic, leaned forward with an expression of bewilderment. "Princess, your methods are highly irregular. You propose abandoning centuries of proven diplomatic frameworks in favor of what you call emotional honesty. How can such an approach be considered reliable or safe?" Zarathix had expected this question. 3 weeks of secret music sessions with the humans had taught her that real communication required risk, vulnerability, and trust. "Elder Morthak, may I demonstrate with a practical example?" The council exchanged glances before nodding their consent. Zarathix activated the chamber's communication system and requested the presence of Ambassador Crixtal of the Hegemony, one of the most notoriously difficult species to work with. The Hegemony were crystalline beings who communicated through harmonic vibrations and considered most other species to be chaotic noise generators. When Ambassador Crixtal arrived, his crystal form resonated with frequencies that the translation matrix interpreted as barely controlled irritation. "What does the young princess require? I have important work to attend to." In the past, Zarathix would have responded with formal protocols, careful not to offend while trying to establish a framework for productive dialogue. Instead, she did something that made the entire council gasp. She began to sing, not words, but pure tones that she had learned from Dr. Wright's keyboard exercises. Simple harmonies that gradually built into complex patterns, incorporating elements of both human musical structure and hegemony harmonic communication. She had spent hours learning to understand how the crystalline beings used frequency and resonance to convey not just meaning, but emotional context. Ambassador Crixtal's irritated vibrations stopped abruptly. His crystal form began to resonate in harmony with her singing, adding deep bass notes that complemented her higher frequencies. Together, they created a musical conversation that transcended language entirely. When the improvised duet ended, Crixtal's form pulsed with colors that the translation matrix identified as profound surprise and respect. Princess Zarathix, you have learned to speak in the deep harmonics. Not even our own young ones master such nuanced emotional expression so quickly. How did you achieve this understanding? I learned from humans, Ambassador, she replied honestly. They taught me that music is a universal language, and that emotional authenticity creates connections that formal protocols cannot achieve. The crystalline being turned toward the Council of Elders, his resonance shifting to what could only be described as enthusiasm. Honored elders, this princess has accomplished something remarkable. For the first time, an outsider has truly communicated with our species rather than simply exchanging information. If she can bridge the gap between hegemony, harmonic consciousness, and other forms of awareness, she possesses diplomatic abilities beyond anything I have previously encountered. After Krixtal departed, the council chamber remained silent for several minutes. Finally, Elder Velthara, the eldest and most traditional member, spoke slowly. Princess, what you have demonstrated challenges everything we understand about diplomatic interaction. How can we be certain that this approach will work with other species? Because I have already tested it with 6 different species over the past 3 weeks, Zarathix replied. The Zephyrians responded when I learned to appreciate their chaos pattern art. The Andromedans opened up when I showed genuine curiosity about their mathematical music. The Centaurans shared their deep cultural memories when I offered to share some of my own fears and uncertainties. She paused, letting this information settle before continuing. Each species has different ways of expressing authenticity, but they all recognize it when they encounter it. Formal protocols create barriers. Emotional honesty creates bridges. Elder Morthak's expression had shifted from skepticism to something approaching wonder. If what you claim is true, this could revolutionize diplomatic relations throughout the galaxy, but such claims require extensive validation. Then let me propose a real test, Zarathix said, her confidence growing. The Korthak Empire has been refusing all diplomatic contact for over 50 years. They consider other species to be beneath their notice and have rejected every attempt at formal communication. If my approach can succeed where traditional methods have failed, would that provide sufficient validation? The council members looked at each other in alarm. The Korthaks were one of the most powerful and xenophobic species in known space. Their empire controlled dozens of systems, and their military technology was generations ahead of most other civilizations. They had made it clear that they considered diplomatic contact with lesser species to be beneath their dignity. Princess, the Korthaks are dangerous, Elder Velthara warned. They have destroyed entire diplomatic missions for perceived slights. They view any attempt at communication as an invasion of their superior space. What makes you think they would respond to your methods? Zarathix had spent considerable time researching the Korthaks, and she had reached a conclusion that would have been impossible before her experiences with human music. Because they are not actually xenophobic, elders. They are afraid. The statement sent shocked ripples through the council chamber. Afraid? Elder Morthak demanded. The Korthaks are one of the most militarily advanced species in the galaxy. What could they possibly fear? Being misunderstood, Zarathix replied simply. Every documented interaction with the Korthaks shows the same pattern. They become hostile when other species try to impose their own cultural frameworks or communication styles. But they have never been approached by someone willing to learn their actual methods of expression. She activated a holographic display showing her analysis of Korthak cultural records. Their art forms are based on what they call precision beauty, incredibly complex patterns that require perfect execution to achieve their intended effect. Their language uses mathematical relationships between concepts rather than linear semantic structures. Their social interactions are built around shared appreciation for technical excellence. They sound completely incompatible with emotional authenticity, Elder Velthara observed. No, Zarathix shook her head. They express authenticity through precision and dedication to perfection. When they create their precision art, they are being as emotionally honest as humans are when they improvise music. The difference is in the method, not the underlying motivation. She paused, then made her proposal. Give me a small diplomatic vessel and 3 months. If I can establish meaningful contact with the Korthaks, it will prove that emotional authenticity can bridge even the most challenging cultural gaps. If I fail, I will accept that my methods are inadequate and pursue a different career path. The council deliberated for hours before reaching their decision. The risks were enormous, but the potential rewards were even greater. If Princess Zarathix could succeed where decades of traditional diplomacy had failed, it would open new possibilities for galactic cooperation and understanding. 2 weeks later, Zarathix found herself aboard the small diplomatic vessel Harmony's Edge, approaching the border of Korthak space with a minimal crew and maximum uncertainty. She had spent those weeks preparing for the most challenging diplomatic encounter of her life, studying everything known about Korthak culture and practicing the skills she had learned from her human friends. Marcus Chen had volunteered to accompany her as a cultural advisor, along with Dr. Wright and their portable music equipment. The humans had insisted that their presence might provide valuable perspective on emotional communication across species barriers. "Are you nervous?" Marcus asked, as they prepared to enter Korthak territory. Zarathix considered the question honestly. "Yes, but also excited. For the first time in my life, I feel like I understand what diplomacy is really supposed to accomplish." When they crossed into Korthak space, the response was immediate. 3 massive warships surrounded the Harmony's Edge, their weapon systems clearly active. The lead ship transmitted a message in the harsh mathematical language of the Korthak Empire. "Unknown vessel has violated Korthak territorial integrity. State your purpose before termination protocols are initiated." Instead of responding through normal communication channels, Zarathix did something unprecedented. She had spent weeks learning to understand Korthak mathematical language, and she had discovered something that no previous diplomatic mission had noticed. It was musical. Not musical in the way humans understood music, but musical in the sense that it used mathematical relationships and harmonic ratios to create meaning. The Korthaks weren't just speaking, they were performing calculated compositions that expressed both information and emotional context through precise numerical relationships. Zarathix activated her ship's communication array and began to respond in kind. But instead of using standard translation matrices, she composed her response as a mathematical symphony, expressing her peaceful intentions through harmonic progressions that followed Korthak aesthetic principles. The warship's weapons powered down. A new voice came through the communication system, speaking in tones of profound surprise. "Unknown entity demonstrates understanding of proper communication protocols. Identify your species and explain how you achieved comprehension of superior Korthak language structures." "I am Princess Zarathix of the Velthari Empire," she responded, continuing to structure her language as mathematical music. "I achieved understanding by recognizing that your communication methods are not merely functional, but artistic. You speak in composed perfection, creating meaning through mathematical beauty." The silence that followed stretched for several minutes before the lead warship transmitted again. "Princess Zarathix demonstrates unprecedented appreciation for Korthak cultural sophistication. Request permission to come aboard flagship for formal evaluation of your claimed understanding." 3 hours later, Zarathix found herself in the most challenging diplomatic encounter of her career. The Korthak commander, a being whose name translated roughly as "perfect calculation of supreme harmony," tested her understanding of their culture through increasingly complex mathematical conversations. But the real breakthrough came when she asked if she could share something from her own culture that had helped her understand Korthak beauty. With Commander Perfect Calculation's permission, she had Marcus and Dr. Wright demonstrate human jazz improvisation, explaining how humans created spontaneous beauty through structured interaction. The Korthak response was immediate and profound. They recognized the underlying mathematical relationships in jazz harmony, but they were astounded by the human's ability to create complex beauty in real time without pre-calculation. "Your species achieves precision beauty through chaos navigation?" Commander Perfect Calculation asked, his mathematical language reflecting amazement. "This demonstrates creative capabilities we had not believed possible among lesser beings." "We are not lesser beings," Zarathix replied gently. "We are different beings with different approaches to creating beauty and meaning. But we all share the desire to create, to communicate, to understand, and be understood." The first formal diplomatic accord between the Korthak Empire and the galactic community was signed 6 weeks later, opening trade routes and cultural exchanges that had been impossible for half a century. But more importantly, it established a new model for diplomatic interaction based on genuine appreciation for different forms of cultural expression. Princess Zarathix returned to the Star Weaver's promise as the most celebrated young diplomat in Velthari history. But she also returned as something more, a being who had learned that the greatest diplomatic skill was not the ability to navigate cultural protocols, but the willingness to see the beauty in how other species express their authentic selves. The humans had given her more than music lessons. They had given her a new understanding of what it meant to connect with others across the vast differences that seemed to divide species throughout the galaxy. And in learning to appreciate the mathematical symphonies of the Korthaks, the chaotic artistry of the Zephyrians, and the harmonic consciousness of the hegemony, she had discovered that emotional authenticity truly was a universal language. Years later, as Ambassador Zarathix established the Galactic Institute for Cross-Species Understanding, she would keep a simple human kalimba on her desk. Students often asked about the small thumb piano, and she would always give the same answer. "It reminds me that the most profound diplomatic tool is the willingness to make music together."